Do you know the symptoms of Pandorum?
I've seen it before. How do you think you would react if you knew the truth? The truth.
Hey, it's Destro7000 here, and today I'm going to be talking about Pandorum, which is a sci-fi horror film. So Pandorum feels like a kind of, maybe a cross between a Riddick pitch black film with Event Horizon with Fight Club due to a weird twist that happens at the end. The film starts with like standard space with titles saying, 1969, man lands on the moon, and then it goes through the years, and every new date it shows the population of Earth, and it's rising and it's rising until it's a ridiculously large number, and they say that Earth is destroying itself from within basically because of overpopulation. And so they've dispatched this ship called the Elysium, which is a colony making ship, to the best Earth-like planet that has been found, called Tanis. And that's where we join the story on the ship Elysium, with its crew just leaving Earth, and it receives a message from Earth saying, "You're all that's left of us." It's kind of a cryptic message. And then we cut to many, many years in the future, and this is where it gets into a kind of pitch black Riddick style movie. Corporal Bauer, who's the main character, who's played by Ben Foster, wakes up in this cryopod with these very cool and gross makeup effects on his skin. Like there's this kind of shrink wrap, gross, looks like he's just been born or something. He's got like wrinkly skin and unused muscles as he comes out this cryopod where he's been sleeping. So he's been woken up abruptly, and the ship is dark. And something's wrong, like there should be power but there's no power, and he's very disoriented, and he can't quite remember who he is, and he's got memory loss coming out of cryosleep, and he like looks on his pod name and goes, Bauer? Okay, that's me, Bauer. And then he finds a drawer with like a photo of his wife, and like it says, "In case of emergency memory loss" or something. And it's got like this little chest full of like mementos and things from his past life, so he can try and remember who he is. And they slowly regain memory, all the people who come out of the cryopods. And so he goes over to another cryopod nearby to try and he's trying to find his flight crew, because there's meant to be like a rota of like 3 flight crew at a time. Taking it in shifts to wake up from cryosleep and fly the ship, and then go back into cryosleep as another takes over from them. And he goes over to the nearest cryopod, and it says Captain Peyton on the cryopod, and he wakes up this guy who's meant to be Captain Peyton, and he's played by Dennis Quaid, who I always remember from a film called Dragonheart in the 90s, where he's a like medieval dragon slayer guy. So he wakes up too, and they're very, very disoriented, and they have memory loss, and they're trying to work out, hold on, their memory slowly comes back to them in little pieces, and they start remembering what their mission is, and they scamper off and they find this control station somewhere, and they figure out how to power it up even though the rest of the ship is in darkness. And they say, well, we got to get to either the bridge or the reactor, because the ship is just, there's no power, something's going on, we can't control anything while this is happening. And they're very confused because they can't find any other crew members, and there should have been a previous flight crew who woke up before them to wake them out of cryosleep, and that flight crew hasn't like woken them up, so they're very baffled at this. So Bauer, the main character, takes it upon himself to go and find the reactor to power up the ship, because he works out he's some kind of engineer. So he leaves Peyton at the control station because Peyton's got a radio link to him, and there's a cool scene where Bauer decides to crawl through an air vent here, and it's so claustrophobic. It's actually the main bit that I remember from the movie is like this really tight claustrophobic air vent system, and Bauer's crawling through it, like lying on his stomach crawling through it, and there are these like tubes and wires at all four corners of this circular tunnel, like closing in on him, and they seem to get closer and closer and tighter, and he just seems like so claustrophobic, and it's done really well. Eventually he finds a corpse at the end of the air vent and then bursts out onto the other side and goes exploring the ship. Now, a lot of this first bit of the movie from this point on is I don't like how it's shot, because it's really dark. I mean, there's so much pitch black in frame, and it's such a bad filmmaker thing to let yourself fill the entire frame with pitch black except for little lights here and there, because you lose all sense of geography and you don't always know what's going on in the frame. And so it's very, very black for a couple like scenes here at the beginning and a couple scenes at the end with the reactor. You can't quite work out what's going on. Could do with some colour, could do with some just you can make something spooky and atmospheric and scary without reducing the entire frame to pitch black. You know, you can just light something in one hue and make it creepy. Also, there are a lot of kind of cheap shock tactics here, of kind of sudden jumps in the sound, in the music, and suddenly a torch shines on a corpse. You know, there's some of those kind of shock jump tactics here. So he's bumping into corpses of the crew, like a couple of them, and then he sees signs of life because there's something shuffling around in the darkness near a corpse, and it runs off. And then when he goes to look at the corpse, a German survivor girl, and I never quite find out her name in the movie, so I'm going to be calling her German survivor girl quite a lot, jumps on him out of the darkness, like she wants to kill him with this weird curvy blade thing, and she's like, be quiet, and then she runs off into the dark when she hears a noise. And it turns out that the shuffling sound of life earlier on was this weird orc creature, of which there are loads. It doesn't really suit sci-fi when you see these creatures. They're the main monster of the movie. They look like they'd be more at home in Lord of the Rings or something. They look basically like kind of orcs, war painted up, slightly skeleton-like. They don't talk, they just roar, and some of them are carrying spears and things. They kind of look like, I don't know, men in thick prosthetics and makeup with kind of war paint on. This movie has quite a lot of flashbacks as well. So Bauer has a flashback where he remembers he was a child and he saw a TV report in his family's home saying that Tanis is habitable and has its own plant life and a small amount of ecosystem before the humans had even reached it. And that's when Earth decided to send a mission there. He also has another flashback where he's a teenager, I think, and he's got a girlfriend, and he can't figure out whether she stayed behind on Earth or she got sent with him on the ship Elysium to start the colony. And so he talks to Peyton about it, and so their main motivations are to power up the ship again, get to the reactor, get to the bridge, avoid the weird creatures, and locate their wives who might be sleeping on board in a cryopod somewhere. Suddenly, while Bauer's creeping around remembering stuff, he suddenly blurts out over the radio link to Peyton that he remembers something called Pandorum. And then they both jointly remember in a flashback that Pandorum, the title of the movie, is this strange mental condition, this mental, not disease, but this kind of mental condition when some crew members come out of cryosleep. they kind of go insane, and they remember a previous mission where crew members woke up out of cryo sleep, and one of the crew members ejected all, like, the thousands of colonists just into space to die in little pods, because he thought the mission was evil. Bauer finds a living crew member who's sort of been booby-trapped, sort of like a predator would do. He cuts him out and frees him, but then the creatures come. They come in a big group and knife him to death, basically. They've got, like, war paint and glow sticks and giant knives, and they all, like, crowd around him and knife him to death. And every time they've got one of these creatures, they start to shoot the film in, like, high shutter speed, and it's all jerky and slightly hard to follow. Bauer then meets this kind of Vietnamese survivor who he's talking to him, and they're trying to understand each other, but he only speaks Vietnamese and Bauer only speaks American, and they're just American? English! And they're just trying to understand each other, and they work out that the Vietnamese survivor, who's got this big curvy blade, like the other survivor, was going to be a farmer. So was a colonist who's come out of hypersleep and was going to be a farmer when they reached the planet Tanis that they're heading for. So the Vietnamese guy saves Bauer's life from the creatures, and then they part ways again, saying that Bauer's going to go to the reactor and try and get the power on. Peyton gets cut off from the radio link for a while. He's still at that control station, and he's kind of been left alone, and he starts getting paranoid and hearing noises all around him, but he can't see what the noises are coming from. And then Bauer enters this really red room all of a sudden, so the lighting sort of fixes itself from this point on for a while until they reach the reactor. You can pretty much see everything that's going on. So there's a very red room full of cargo shipping containers he enters into, and he gets attacked by the German survivor girl again. And the Vietnamese guy comes out of nowhere, and the German girl survivor and the Vietnamese guy survivor have a big fight. And Peyton's had enough of this crap, and he gets out this kind of laser gun that he's found, shoots it at the sky and goes, I know it's been every man for himself, but we got to work together now. And so he kind of reconciles the two sides and tries to get them on the same mission to reach the reactor. The girl's got more survival instinct, and she says we better take the long way round to reach the reactor. So first she takes them to this little biohazard symboled door, and they go through into basically the room that she's been staying in. And it's this big kind of white walled, white corridored, clean laboratory. It's like the brightest lit part of the film, basically. It's this very white, bright laboratory. And even though she's all bedraggled in a mess, she said she was originally one of the ship's biologists, and that this is basically like a micro ecosystem conservation vault. And they go to this window, and there's this giant tube full of kind of seeds and insects and things for the colony that they were meant to make when they reached Tanis. Just in the walls, like being safeguarded in this behind this locked door from the creatures. Back at the control station where Captain Peyton's been left, Peyton hears more noises, and then this hand pushes through the weird claustrophobic vent system, and he pulls out this guy from the vent system. He's like, looks like he's just woken up out of cryosleep. He's very confused at this guy. He says, "What's your name? What's your name?" He said, "Gallo. My name's Gallo." He said, "Where have you come from?" He says, "The bridge. I've come from the bridge." And then over at the three survivors, Bauer, the Vietnamese guy, and the German girl, who I don't know the names of, so I'm going to call them that. The three survivors reach this kind of greenish, huge room full of kind of pits and steps. And apparently it's the main cryochamber silo of all the kind of main colonists. The girl says this is the creature's main hunting ground. And Bauer looks up and wonders if his wife is on the ship here, or if she's been eaten. The Vietnamese guy for a moment is distracted. The girl says he's hunting, and Bauer and the girl fall headfirst through a trapdoor into this little kind of sewer that's full of kind of corpses that they're in liquid, like up to their necks, that might be blood or something, but you can't quite make it out because it's all black. They see all these bones and things of tons of dead human colonists that are lying around, and they hide from a creature that is snooping around above them. Eventually they climb back out again into the green cryochamber room, and the creature comes at them. It's a lone creature on its own, but it's got a spear, and it takes all three of the survivors to kind of fight it off and take it down. And they almost don't succeed, but I think the girl cuts off its arm, and then they finally get the better of it and kind of bludgeon it to death. At the point where they finally finish off the one creature, a horde of other creatures appear above them, and they know they can't take them all on, so they start running. I think one of them presses a button and a cryopod releases and pops out of the ground and opens, and a colonist pops out the cryopod and starts waking up, and suddenly that distracts the horde of creatures, which immediately go to the opening pod and eat the guy who's just been woken up from cryosleep, and the three survivors get a chance to run off and escape. They escape to this small spherical iron room and lock the door behind them. Turns out to be inhabited by this senile old black guy. He's seems kind of confused at first, but he actually has a great deal of knowledge about the ship. They're in a spherical iron room, and he's on a higher level in a gantry thing that runs around the equator of the room, and they're at the bottom of it. And he says, "I'll make you food, and I'll send it down to you on a pulley thing." At this point, Bauer talks to the German biologist girl, and she says she thinks the creatures are actually passengers who got fed this thing called accelerator fluid into their cryopods that was meant to mutate them to adapt to life on Tanis when they got there, but instead it's mutated them to adapt to survival on the ship, which is very strange, but a cool concept. Back at the control station, Peyton's arguing with Gallo, who he doesn't trust. Neither of them trust each other. Gallo says he's killed his flight crew at the bridge, supposedly in self-defense because they had Pandorum. But Peyton thinks that Gallo has Pandorum, and they're kind of arguing with each other. Gallo's trying to persuade him that he's not crazy. In the sphere room, while the old black guy is feeding the three survivors, he starts telling them a story about Elysium's journey and what he knows about it. This is intercut by the director or the editor with Gallo telling his story of the truth of Pandorum, the kind of craziness thing. So as the audience, we're learning pieces of information of the overview of the whole story from the little story over here being told of Elysium's journey and the story of Pandorum told over here. Like, they're not like both saying the same things as each other, they're just telling two parts of two sides of the coin. As well as these two stories being told at the same time as each other, there's a flashback saying that as the ship Elysium originally flew back from Earth, they received a last message from Earth saying, "You're all that's left of us." And the implication, Gallo says, is that Earth had been destroyed. Peyton's really sceptical of this. He's going, how could it have been destroyed in one day? It had to be nuclear or an asteroid. And Gallo says it doesn't matter whether it happened or not. It just matters what impact it had on the crew's psyche. There was a three-man crew on deck there, and Gallo was saying that he was one of the three-man crew on that original rotor when they received the message. Gallo says that the result of receiving this message drove the other two crew members insane, and he killed them in self-defense. The black guy's telling of this story talks about Gallo going insane himself and killing the other two crew members. You believe at this point the black dude's story of what Gallo was doing more than Gallo's story. The black guy says that after Gallo killed the other two crew members from going insane, he was technically alone on the ship. Everyone else on the ship, there were thousands of other people, but they were all asleep. in cryopods, and he had complete control of the bridge of the ship, Elysium. So he decided to play God with the people on the ship. He kind of woke some people up in cryopods, told them to do things by radio, locked off bulkheads to people as punishments. He was just kind of playing God with all the people who were on the ship, and like killing some, waking others up. And then after he had his fun, he kind of got bored of playing games with them and went into a cryopod himself to go to sleep. And he went into a specific cryopod. So after the black guys completed telling his story to the 3 survivors, they suddenly wake up upside down in chains, and they realise he's gassed them and trapped them for meat so that he can survive longer against the creatures. While they're hanging upside down, Bauer negotiates with the trapper, saying that he could survive longer if he helps them reach the reactor, because the reactor's doomed to shut down within 1 hour and the whole ship will die. This is persuasive to the trapper guy, and he decides to kind of help them because the reactor's dying. Bauer calls up Peyton on the radio system and confirms that the reactor's going to shut down within the hour. At this point, Gallo's going quite mental. He's like whispering negativity into Peyton's ear about how he'll fail if he tries to turn the reactor off and reboot it. And he keeps saying that he thinks they should all get into pods and leave the ship instead. And he keeps trying to drive him insane. And we as the audience know now that Gallo is this strange kind of mischievous god who, he murdered everyone, and he played with all the inhabitants of the ship and woke people up and killed people, and then, went off to sleep in a cryopod, and has only just woken up from being in that cryopod after screwing with the ship all those years ago. As the black trapper guy leads everyone at gunpoint to slowly find the reactor, they come across a room that is apparently for the cryopods of the colonists' family members. Everyone in the room is apparently dead in their pods, but Bauer remembers his wife isn't among them because she refused to come with him on the trip. And there's a flashback, and you get a nice kind of view of apocalyptic Earth, and Bauer's like wandering the rainy streets wearing this kind of gas mask turban combo, which looks kind of slightly Arabic, I think. And that's the point when he first chose to enlist in the colonization program aboard Elysium, is because his wife refused to come with him and basically left him. And Bauer sees another pod and says he remembers something about Peyton's wife, Marianne, and it's never fully explained in the movie. I think you're meant to make leaps of the mind yourself to work out what this thing he remembers is. Now the survivors finally reach the reactor with the trapper, and it's a big, dark, grimy, sparking thing, and from this point on the lighting gets very black again, and you can see some of what's going on, but there's a lot of stuff going on that it's very easy to miss because it's so dark. And back at the control center, Gallo's trying to persuade Peyton to stop them rebooting the reactor. Gallo and Peyton get into a little fight, and Gallo gets hold of a weapon and orders himself to be ejected in a space pod away from the ship before the reactor dies. He orders Peyton to do it at gunpoint, kind of walking him into the pod. He asks Peyton to put in the code, but Peyton puts in a code for a simulation ejection, so he basically locks Gallo in the pod instead of firing him off into space, which Gallo's furious at. He keeps ranting and rambling, and you get a kind of clue here that something's not right, because he's talking to Peyton through the pod's radio system, and Peyton mutes the pod's radio system, and he can still hear Gallo. As Bauer and the German girl reboot the reactor, some of the ship's power systems come back on. You'd imagine a lot more of the ship would power up and get bright, but it seems like some of these corridors are meant to be pitch black because some of them stay kind of pretty dark. The Vietnamese guy has been cut off from the main group, and he has a fight scene with a tribal leader creature who obviously has some sort of honor code because he tosses him a spear before they have a fight. Predator style, I guess. The Vietnamese guy wins the fight, but he sees a baby tribal mutant creature and he spares its life, but it just kills him. Now that the reactor's been rebooted and the old black trapper guy has no hindrance to the length of his survival anymore, he turns on them and gets selfish again, trying to lock doors in front of the escaping Bauer and the German girl who are running from the creatures. Gallo seems to break free out of the ejector pod at this moment. It's not quite clear how it's done, but he has a fight with Peyton. And there are a lot of hints in the editing flashing by really fast that not all is what it seems during this fight. You realise that Gallo is probably something dreamed up by Peyton. And this is the Fight Club thing where you think, hold on, he might actually be fighting himself right now. He's dreamed up this Gallo character in his loneliness at the control station. So you start to think that Peyton maybe has Pandorum and is insane and dreaming people up. Suddenly Peyton's alone, and the old black trapper guy reaches Peyton at his control center, and it's the first time he's not alone, and Peyton just kills him. At that moment, Peyton finally gains access through a door onto the bridge, and Bauer and the German girl arrive at the same time. The bridge has its lights out, but Bauer spots Peyton in a chair in the dark, and Peyton announces that his name is actually Corporal Gallo. So this mischievous god character, who was played by a younger guy through the film, is actually the younger version of himself that Peyton's been dreaming up, and that's not actually Captain Peyton. He was just in the cryopod of someone called Captain Peyton, and Bauer opened that Captain Peyton's cryopod and just assumed that that was the name of the guy who came out of it. So at gunpoint, Bauer asks, I suppose I'll call him Peyton Gallo now, where are they? They're on the bridge now, so where is Elysium? Have they reached Tanis? What's going on? Where are they? Are they in deep space? As a response, Peyton Gallo opens the windows of the cockpit, and there's just pure black outside, and there's no stars or anything, and there should be stars or something, but it's just pure black. And it's slightly an Event Horizon moment, because it's if you've watched that film, that film just goes for a trip into basically hell. I think there might be a moment where they look outside the windows and they're seeing something they're not expecting to be out there, and it's like that, except it's just blackness. And this just kind of adds to the feeling of insanity of the crew on the ship. Bauer starts, for some reason, going a bit mad himself, he thinks that he's got Pandorum, I think, because he can't see stars out the windows. Peyton Gallo starts ranting insane ideas in Bauer's ear, trying to make him more insane. The creatures are at the door trying to burst into the cockpit at this point, and I think Bauer fires off a shot at them from his blaster rifle, and the shot ricochets and hits the windows above with the black sky, and the German girl tells him to look up, and suddenly this bioluminescent creature swoops over the cockpit, and they realise they're underwater. They've crashed deep underwater, and they're on Tanis because there's an ecosystem there already. And the ricochet of his laser bolt smashes the window. And at that point, water starts bursting into the ship. It's like a submarine, and there's a hull breach, and the water just pours into the ship and starts to flood everything. And at this point, for some reason, Bauer snaps out of his insanity, runs with the German girl into one of the ejection pods, and as Peyton Gallo gets drowned under the water inside the cockpit, Bauer and the German girl launch out of a ejection pod out of the ship and onto the surface of the sea on Tanis. As they escape, you realise that all the ejection pods and the cryopods are one and the same thing. So every cryopod is an ejection pod. And because there's been a hull breach, because Bowers shot a hole in the window, which had been concealed this entire time until this very moment, because the bridge has been locked off to everyone, the water has breached the hull, and an emergency evacuation procedure has been triggered, launching all these ejection cryopods, and basically all the crew that had survived sleeping in the cryopods to be eaten by the creatures. Now they've been launched out to the surface of the sea on Tanis. And the camera pans close to a very reachable alien shoreline that's nearby to them. And the last shot is Tanis from space that looks like Earth, except there's I think there's 2 moons, one of them's a giant orange one. And there's a new caption about the colonial population, and it says it's something low, like 1,000 people. So yeah, there is some good character building in this film. It's a very good film. Ben Foster's character is above average character built. It's he's got an interesting background to him, and you do get the sense that he gets a kind of heroism from persuading people to join forces. Like, he persuades the Vietnamese guy and the girl to work together. He persuades the black trapper that there's a way for them to work together. The most interesting characters are probably this Gallo Peyton, him and his younger self. I guess the older one, who we call Peyton, is meant to represent the sanity of the character, and the Gallo is the waking insanity of the character as he remembers who he is. He remembers the person that he used to be that decided to play with all these people's lives after going insane from hearing the Earth had supposedly been destroyed, which they never confirm nor deny. I didn't really like the creatures. As I say, I think they're just kind of like Lord of the Rings orc things. But I did like the explanation of the creatures. Like they've been evolved to suit survivalism in the wrong environment via this chemical that's been pumped into them in the cryopods. And I loved the kind of backstory of Gallo and how he just he got this god complex where he just he was alone on the ship, so he just decided to play with the cryopods because he was in a position of power and they were asleep and he was awake. That was pretty awesome. I like the revelation that the ejector pods and cryopods were one and the same. The ship itself had good character. I think they had lots of different chambers on the ship, and the second time watching it I actually enjoyed that more because I could actually see, there's every different room on the ship. Even though it was shot quite dark in places, they all had kind of a different character from each other, a different function. You've got the bright white seed vault, you've got the red cargo rooms, the big green, they're like colour-coded as well, so that helps. You've got the green cryopod room with all the weird diagonal surfaces on it, the spherical room, the bridge. Yeah, I admire that sort of thing in sci-fi. It gives you a good sense of geography if you can work out where the heck you are, and there's all these different places and they all have a function, and that's described to the viewer. That's cool. The revelation that they were underwater wasn't... I don't know if the filmmakers thought they were being original with that. They weren't original because that's been done in... I've seen other things where that's done, most notably Farscape. But it was cool. It was cool. I mean, you could definitely get the sense that it was Event Horizon-y. That seems like the main inspiration for this. Seeing it again, it's a lot better than I thought it was, and you should definitely check it out. Pandorum.